Democracy no longer ends with a bang, but with a whimper. The slow and steady weakening of critical institutions, such as the judiciary and the press, and the gradual erosion of long-standing political norms. This is part of the synopsis of How Democracies Die by Levitsky and Ziblatt. Since 2010, Hungary has experienced a gradual but severe democratic decline driven by initially democratically elected officials who expanded their grip on power while upholding the facade of democracy. This was the first case of democratic backsliding in the West. This, however, should not be treated as an isolated event without any domino effects. Hungary's illiberal turn has provided an authoritarian template for countries like Poland. We would like to further analyze the differences between Poland and Hungary regarding the evolution of the independence of justice. Here we try to look at the impact of democratic backsliding on the judicial systems in the countries and make a comparison between the two. This way we hope to find a more concrete answer regarding the resilience of the democratic institutions present in the respective countries.
Before we go further into the comparison of Poland as well as Hungary, we need to explain why we chose these two countries to analyze. Both countries were part of the Eastern Bloc under the influence of the Soviet Union during the Cold War. They experienced decades of authoritarian communist regimes that left deep marks on their political institutions as well as their societal attitudes towards governance. The fall of communism between 1989 and 1991 led to rapid democratization. Joining the EU in 2004 symbolized a turn towards EU values after decades of Soviet domination. EU principles like the rule of law, democratization, and open market principles led to rapid reforms in both countries. However, the speed and the nature of these reforms created vulnerabilities, such as incomplete institutional reforms and a social distrust towards political elites. Over time, many citizens in Hungary as well as Poland grew frustrated with the perceived loss of sovereignty and EU's liberal agenda. This provided for fertile grounds for parties like Hungary's Fidesz party and Poland's Law and Justice Party to rise as defenders of national identity and against interference of foreign actors. The choice of analyzing Poland as well as Hungary comes from the fact that they are both trendsetters of undermining liberal democratic achievements in Central and Eastern Europe. When we look at the democracy index of Poland as well as Hungary, we see a clear deterioration in both countries, with 1 being an authoritarian regime and 10 being a perfect democracy. When we look at Hungary, we see a decline of democracy throughout the last 15 years. In Poland, we have a different vision. You see a small increase of democracy between 2010 and 2014. This is because the Law and Justice Party in Poland wasn't in power back then. However, after 2015, they gained power again, and we still see the decline of democratization. Right now, both countries are labeled as a flawed democracy. To give an example, over the last several years, the government has overhauled the judicial system in an unlawful, unconstitutional way. Judges in Poland have been called enemies by the state and faced threats, intimidation and harassment by the government multiple times. In Hungary, the Fidesz party did not need to use such tactics to pressure much of the institution into compliance. Given its supermajority in parliament, it easily adopted an amendment to the constitution to strengthen its grip on the judiciary. Next to that, they also expanded the powers of the highest court and appointed loyalists to it to lead it. To sum up, there are lots of similarities between both countries regarding some part of their history and the fact that they are both experiencing democratic backsliding.
The Polish transition to democracy and to market economy in the late 1980s is often seen as a very classic example of a negotiated move to political reforms due to the series of very peaceful negotiation known today as the Roundtable Talks. These reforms then culminated in the new and reformed Polish Constitution of 1997, which established an extensive system of checks and balances to limit the power of former communist elites. However, one interesting fact about the Constitution is that the Polish Republic was established as a semi-presidential and a multi-party system, which means that if one party has control of both the legislature and the presidency, it might actually become very powerful. The Constitution also established 2 new tribunals, which weren't there before in the state system, which are the Constitutional Tribunal and the State Tribunal. But the Constitutional Tribunal is, in fact, a very powerful institution, since it is the only court in Poland empowered with striking down acts and regulations which it deems unconstitutional. Despite some troubles in the beginning, Poland's political landscape actually began to stabilize quite a lot in the beginning of the 21st century. However, this all came to the test in the 2015 elections, when the conservative Law and Justice Party became the first party to win an overall majority in both the presidential and the parliamentary elections, hence becoming the first party to control both the legislative and the executive branches of the Polish constitution. This Law and Justice Party is regarded as a very ultra-nationalist, right-wing and socially conservative party, which resonated with Polish voters in the 2015 campaign by, for example, promising to cleanse the state of a corrupt elite. They opposed some progressive legislation, such as legislation on gender identities and same-sex marriages, for example. They also rejected EU's refugee policy. And since this conservative Law and Justice Party came to power in 2015, Poland has actually witnessed one of the most rapid declines of democracy in the region, Central and Eastern Europe region, according to the Freedom House. They started to change the judiciary, mainly, which allowed the government to appoint judges and influence the selection process for the Constitutional Tribunal and the Supreme Court and other key judicial bodies. Law and Justice also introduced 2 new chambers within the Supreme Court, one of them being the disciplinary chamber, which allowed the government authority to hear and rule on disciplinary charges against all judges in Poland. And while these moves were indeed seen as a way to assert greater control over the judiciary by the Law and Justice Party, and well, despite a lot of eruption of protests in Poland against the Law and Justice Party, in the October 2023 election, Law and Justice actually still became the biggest party in parliament, but this time they didn't get a seat in the government's coalition. However, the Polish president, as of today, is still very much aligned with the Law and Justice Party, and as president, because of the semi-presidential system, he can indeed exercise significant power over the parliament. But however, according to a 2024 European Commission report on the rule of law, Poland is now implementing a new action plan on the rule of law to address these long-standing concerns of the EU of the independence of Poland's judicial institutions.
So now we will talk about Hungary. When we talk about what happened after the Cold War, Hungary followed quite the same path as Poland. Moreover, they didn't even establish a new constitution. Negotiations between the old Soviet communist leaders and the democratic opposition resulted in some liberal democratic modifications of the 1949 Soviet-based constitution. We called up this form of approach, where there is no new constitution after radical change or revolution, but a negotiated modified constitution, pact constitution making. There are actually a lot of academic authors who state that the fact that a constitution is never democratically approved by citizens and is even never approved in the parliament, a big explanation for the bad resilience of the democratic institutions in these countries. So, Hungary is a multi-party democracy and it's a semi-presidential system, but the president isn't chosen directly and has only ceremonial and symbolic powers. So it's de facto and parliament democracy. Between 1990 and 2010, Hungary was a liberal democracy with a lot of different governments and competition between the parties. This changed in 2010. Before 2010, the Social Democrats were the big party and were in government, but they faced major backlash after rumors of corruption and their bad handling of the financial crisis of 2008. So the Hungarian economy wasn't very good. This gave Fidesz the perfect opportunity to win a majority in parliament and change the Hungarian democracy dramatically. So to remain power, Fidesz changed the election system in Hungary, and because they have the majority in parliament, nobody could stop them. So not only they changed the election system to remain power in the future, they also began implementing significant judicial reforms. They not only reformed the judicial, they also reduced the rights of the LGBT community and other minorities in Hungary. For example, they don't agree with the refugee mechanism of the EU, and they reduced the rights of the LGBT community by implementing law which promotes traditional family values.
So the first similarity between Hungary and Poland is called After the Iron Curtain. So Poland and Hungary were both pioneers in the democratic reforms in Central and Eastern Europe, but later let regions shift towards illiberal democracy, Hungary in 2010 and Poland in 2015. The liberal democracies, established after 1998 following the Soviet Union's collapse, proved fragile and immature, gradually backsliding into illiberal regimes. Both countries emerged from communist systems that lacked democratic elements operating under single-style party rule without political competition, free elections, civil rights, or checks and balances. Unlike Czechoslovakia, Romania, or East Germany, Poland and Hungary did not experience revolutions or significant protests against the communist rule. Their transitions were negotiated rather than abrupt. So, both countries, despite once being the leaders of democratic reforms of the regions, had common preconditions to subsequent illiberal backsliding. The second similarity is called the populist parties in force. So, Poland and Hungary joined the EU in 2004, sparking optimism about their democratic futures. However, both nations have experienced illiberal backsliding under populist parties PIS in Poland and Fidesz in Hungary. The shift stems from the post-communist transition, structural changes, and crises that reshaped political landscapes. The global economic crisis of 2007 to 2009 and the 2015 immigration crisis created a fertile ground for radical parties. In 2021, while unemployment in both countries was just at 5%, only 23% of people expressed concern about the economy. Instead, populist leaders capitalized on fears and external threats. 33% of Hungarians and 21% of Poles feared immigrants, while concerns about terrorism stood at 18% in Hungary and 9% in Poland. Ruling parties in both nations exploited nationalist and anti-immigrant rhetoric, portraying themselves as defenders of stability and transition. They accused global liberalism and the EU elites in Brussels of undermining national sovereignty, promoting a vision of Europe rooted in traditional values while rejecting the West's moral decline. Leadership was pivotal. Kaczynski of the PIS and Orbán of Fidesz have dominated their parties for decades. While they reflect aspirations of many citizens, they avoid overt authoritarianism by forcing societal divisions and framing opposition as a threat. Their strategies include ensuring their party loyalty by surrounding themselves with trusted allies and sidelining challenges, while consolidating control over national politics to weaken the oppositions. These tactics underpin their continued dominance and the advance of illiberal governance. So the third similarity is conservatism and the role of the church. So large parts of Polish and Hungarian societies are traditional and religious, fostering traditionalist rhetoric in both states. These parties present themselves as guardians of Christian family values, opposing liberal ideologies such as multiculturalism, LGBTQIA+ rights, and feminism. This rhetoric appeals to rural and older populations, creating a divide with urban, younger, and progressive demographics. Framing the struggle as national identity versus foreign liberal influences, often tied to resistance against the European Union. While Hungary's governance operates independently from the Church, Poland's PIS government closely collaborates with the Catholic Church, aligning policies like abortion with Church teachings. The Church, deeply tied to Poland's identity during foreign occupation and communism, lends moral support to PIS, strengthening its policies. The fourth similarity between Poland and Hungary are the judiciary reforms. Judiciary reforms in Poland and Hungary under populist governments marked an authoritarian shift, breaching the principle of power division and destabilizing checks and balances. Both countries first targeted constitutional courts, then extended to control lower judiciary institutions. The rapid implementation left little room for institutional resistance. Many judges were replaced with politically compliant ones, ensuring long-term governmental control over the judiciary. So, the first big difference between Hungary and Poland is the economy. So, although both Poland and Hungary felt the effects of the global economic crisis, the outcomes differed significantly between the two countries. Poland emerged as a regional leader in economic growth, with its GDP per capita growth rate remaining robust between 2005 to 2017. This growth peaked in 2007 at 7%, before sharply declining to 1.2% in 2012 to 2013. Despite this downturn, it never fell below that point. In contrast, Hungary's economic performance was considerably weaker. Between 2005 and 2009, its GDP per capita growth plummeted from 5% to -7%, followed by years of fluctuation. It only managed to return to 2005 levels by 2014. Hungary even entered a recession slightly earlier than the global crisis, fueling a strong demand for populism. In Poland, the rise of populism was less expected given the favorable economic trajectory. Economic growth did not fully explain the increasing populist sentiment. However, rapid economic and social changes have created significant uncertainty among citizens. Rising inequality, with wealth concentrated in higher income groups, has been a growing issue since 2005. While Hungary's authoritarian turn was largely driven by its economic situation, the dire economic situation, Poland's more modern and diversified economy weathered the crisis better but grappled with the mixed outcomes of rapid growth. So the second difference between Poland and Hungary are the different stances and performance of opposition, strong in Poland and less developed in Hungary. The Solidarity opposition that negotiated with the Polish United Workers' Party, the PZPR, in 1989 had its roots in protests from 1976. After being briefly legalized in 1980 till 1981, it operated underground during material law, re-emerging as the leading force by 1989. Solidarity's strength lay in its deep societal roots and ability to endure repression. Its activists bypassed state control, reviving independent civil society. By the Round Table Agreement, Solidarity challenged communist privileges and paved the way for full democracy. In Hungary, opposition movements developed more gradually and lacked the organizational strength seen in Poland. Before the 1980s, dissident was primarily limited to intellectual circles and reformist factions within the ruling Hungarian Socialist Workers' Party. The regime introduced goulash communication, blending limited economic reforms with relative societal freedoms. This strategy reduced public discontent and delayed the emergence of an unified opposition. However, by the late 1980s, worsening economic conditions and the influence of broader regional changes led to the rise of more organized dissident groups such as the Hungarian Democratic Forum and the Alliance of Free Democrats. Unlike Poland's Solidarity, these groups lacked extensive grassroots networks and had to build support in a shorter time frame. The Hungarian regime's willingness to negotiate reforms and a peaceful transition in 1989 further contrasted with Poland's more confrontational path. So while both countries were transitioning to democracy, Poland's opposition was far more rooted in society, while Hungary's remained more limited in scope and development.
Thank you for watching. We mentioned multiple similarities as well as differences regarding the institutions in Poland and Hungary. As far as Poland is concerned, they are on the way back regarding their democratic backsliding. The perspectives, on the other hand, for Hungary are less bright. There is no one clear result. We do hope to have given you some more insight regarding the resilience in their judicial system. Our aim was to have added to the existing literature and made it accessible to the broader public. These are the sources that we have conducted during our research. See you next time.